Thank you very much for joining us here. My name's Jonas, work as technology lead at IAB Australia, and we're excited to kick off today the first of a series of 3 of these webinars focused upon data-driven digital advertising. There are 3. This is the first one, and we felt best thing to do to kick off the overall topics before we dive into more detail next week and the week after is to have a very representative case study which shows a really effective use of data in marketing, but also there's such an important aspect on responsibility, so sort of balancing that out through what we're doing. So I'll be joined by Chris Durbridge, who you may be able to see up in your screen there, from Equifax, who's the head of consumer insights and marketing services products. So next week we will focus more on the governance and consumer privacy. We will be we're delighted that we'll have a privacy expert, Anna Johnson from Salinger Privacy, giving us an overview from an Australian perspective in terms of what's happening and what to look out for. We'll then provide you an update in terms of some of the projects that we're running and initiatives at the IAB with some of our members. There's a data primer handbook to look out for, and plenty going on. And then we'll run a Q&A with a few members who are experts in the space. And then on the 28th, in 2 weeks' time, we will focus more on identity and some of the global projects that are being led by IAB Tech Lab, who will actually be joining us to both present an update of the project that's the intention of which is to re-architect digital marketing from a technology perspective as we see third-party cookies will be going away over the next 18 months. So how are the technical working groups approaching this? What are we seeing? And we'll try and present a few examples, such as Google's Privacy Sandbox. There's some other projects that are being proposed. The engineers in France from Criteo proposed something recently that's also being considered called Sparrow. So it's quite interesting space. So we're looking forward to running this series for you to really not only provide a good overview of the big topics in relation to governance and privacy, but also in terms of what's happening with identity and from a technical perspective. The other topic to just give you a quick heads up on is the ADAPT. So we're running these again, the Australian digital advertising practices. We put this together about 18 months ago with the AA and the MFA, and we're working very hard on version 2, which will be released by early June. So please look out for that. And an important aspect is not just going through the various topics, whether it's in relation to brand safety, ad fraud, and best practices in various pillars, as we describe them, but there's even 2 chapters that we have on data in terms of governance and consumer privacy. And you'll have information in there, but also very importantly, some checklists for you to take away and action. So we look forward to producing that and really giving that a push. It's good for the industry from top to bottom. So, but for now, I'll leave you in the hands of Chris Durbridge to take us away with this case study, and I'll join at the end for a Q&A. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I'm just sharing my screen. So thanks very much, Jonas, and the IAB really for the opportunity to present here today and as part of this great series that you're running. Initially, we first thought this would be a small group in a conference centre, but obviously with changing times, here we are in a webinar. And thank you all very much for making the time to participate, not only in this series and this webinar. I'm really pleased to be sharing some great work done by the team at Equifax and Datalicious. They've been doing some great work, and here's an opportunity to share it with you about closed-loop marketing campaigns and the responsible use of data inside them. So to explain quickly about myself, so Chris Durbridge, the head of product for consumer insights and marketing services at Equifax. If you're not aware of what Equifax does, we're a large data and information company providing a suite of services across marketing, data management, risk management, across a range of industries. This presentation goes into closed loop marketing campaigns, which is not only the use of your online data in digital, but it also crosses into using the offline data across all channels to create closed loop marketing campaigns and the use of data with inside them. So this slide really details how we look at closed loop campaigns. There's an analytics process, an audience process, and at the end of that is actions. So all analytics and insights need to result in kind of actionable insights. And what I mean by that is able to drive a business decision at some level. So the analytics process is really about stitching together data from disparate data sources, both in digital and offline. And the audience component is really about understanding your customers, who's really interested in the products and services that are being offered, how do you gain insights about that audience, and then ultimately, how do you then action that back into market through digital marketing, through digital advertising to acquire new customers and new interest into your business and services. What this does create is a virtuous cycle. So as you move through analytics, you gain the information and insights to form some level of decisions can be made at the end of that cycle, flowing down into audiences where you then take actions. The important part about making it a closed loop is that the actions that you take flow back into your analytical process. So then you can review the outcomes and measure your business KPIs, performance, to the actions that you've taken in market from what you had existingly to what you're now doing in market. So the analytics part of this presentation is really about how we as a business across Equifax has stitched together both online and offline data to really help a client increase their return on investment and media spend. Now, the primary part of this was done by the team at Datalicious. Datalicious is part of the Equifax group. They've got 10 years experience in digital. They have a combination of data engineers, analysts, data scientists, developers, and architects. They really turn the digital stream of information coming into your business from your websites, web assets, applications, into actionable insights. Then we also stitch that together with offline data, either from the Equifax data resources or from the client directly. We really do this on a daily basis in Equifax, is stitching together various types of different data. And as I move through this, there's some real distinctions and differences in what the data is and how the data can be used. So this is quite a large task when you think about stitching together offline and online data. The challenge as the customer is investing dollars into digital marketing, but not seeing the impact and correlation to actual sales. And I'd like to talk about the business model at play and the way the data flows through the business, particularly in the marketing cycle, to fully understand this model. So this model is applicable across lots of different businesses. It's where you have a digital web asset that is really primarily around lead generation and presenting information back to your customers. The one in this use case was inside the travel industry. So they had customers from all around the world. And essentially they have a website, a digital assets, where customers would come on and they'll drive their paid organic traffic into that website. But on that website is information, sales brochures, content about their products and services. But the sales process itself happens in another system or offline. And that's really the business model where you have your lead generation pages as a data source, completely separated from where you're making your actual sales, who are your actual customers, and they're quite disparate data sets, which is why this is really such a good use case to talk to, because if you're only measuring or the digital component, then you have a real gap in your information flow. So when we reviewed this, their digital asset had, a phone or a travel agent. So the sale was made either over the phone or inside a branch or a travel agent directly. The company was driving a lot of traffic to the website onto their product content. So they also had quite a diverse array of offers. So in travel, that was Antarctica, you might have an adventure, and these are based all around the globe, and they're very different products that appeal to very different markets. And then they had some lead acquisition and content marketing operating off the website. So it was very mature business, has been operating a long period of time. Now looking for really some analytics into investing money into digital, and are they doing it well? The important part to kind of call out on the challenge question was the conversion cycle. So through one of the discoveries in the analytics process, the average conversion cycle for an Aussie booking travel, which might be a little bit hard right now, but when this case study was done, the average time period for that was about 12 weeks, and that was on average. One of the kind of key insights from when they first engaged with the business to when they went through and made a purchase decision. Now that's quite a long life cycle when you look at that in relation to cookies, in relation to stitching that together to find that common understanding across your entire sales cycle. And they had a real cliff of drop-off of information. Now we have people from all around in different industries. That same model applies to different industries. So if you're looking at a home loan, the time cycle to decision for a customer can be quite long. If you're looking for, say, a franchise food, that decision cycle, although the model's still the same, a lot of them have online ordering now, but if you're looking at purchasing fast food or food services, the conversion cycle from seeing my digital asset to me calling or placing an order is quite short. The model runs true across multiple industries where you have your sales assets really separated from your sales materials, and digital assets really separated from where you record your sales and manage your existing customers. And Jonas, I know you had a question about this around the data life cycles across the board.
Well, yes, with different product types, the consideration times, as you say, can really vary. And I think it's interesting with the fast food component, but how does this work for, say, financial services, as you mentioned, home loans or auto and other property transactions? That's a very long lead time. Does that different approach, different challenges there?
Yeah, so it does vary by the industry that everybody's in. So auto has quite a long conversion cycle, say on gaining interest, researching as you're contemplating what you're going to buy, and then into the acquisition cycle itself. The general kind of rule of thumb that we've seen across the board is the value of the transaction that the customer is entering into, the longer the deliberation periods, and that really produces a data challenge for joining the information together and having that persistent view. Same with mortgages. Arguably, you have them for 30 years. There's a switching period, a period of contemplation going into buying a property. These are all very long cycles for customers in the contemplation, deliberation phase of either a property, a major asset like auto and property, and then obviously the credit providing that goes along with it. And being able to stitch that together from what is your digital experience to where the sale takes place. And this is just by a product line that it does get even more complicated if you have, and you're in a business that's successful enough to have multiple product lines, different silos of information inside your business. So through to the next slide. The real objective that the customer was looking for was to understand my customers and the value of online marketing to offline sales. They didn't have that view. It wasn't stitched together. And now if we're probably in that room, I'd throw out to everyone and say, who hasn't received this brief or who has? I certainly get asked this question on a daily basis in many different ways, but it's really breaking it down into your fine 3 components, which you need to gain from part of analytics and audience processes. is really to understand my customers. And that is understanding who is buying from me, what are their preferences, what do they look like, and understanding the value of your online marketing on your actual offline sales processes. So that is who comes through my marketing funnel, where are they coming from, what channels, what do they look like as an audience, what are they going to reading, what are they engaging with on the content of my digital web asset, where you see a lot of the usual kind of KPIs, and then how does that end up in offline sales? So to really break this down for the customer, I had to really put this into 6 steps, which is really defining the right KPIs for this objective. If you're operating an existing business, if you're only looking at one portion of it being digital, does it drive your actual sales? There's quite a difference between the two because you're not quite sure how they're linking together, which was part of the initial problem statement. So the first real step was to define the KPIs that would really meet this objective for the customer. The second point was really to audit what they're doing now and propose new solutions, new KPIs around their current processes. The third one was really defining their tooling they were using. So the tooling we mean by, in the digital aspect, that is, what tools are they using to collect the data off the website? Are they collecting the right tools and tagging the right things on the website to get the information into your digital analytics to see what is happening there? The same thing on the offline sales. What is the data there and the tooling, the capture processes of information and data inside these 2 data silos, which is your online and offline silo. The fourth point was really taking all this information in place. What would be the best practice on the outcomes of the analytics work that need to be implemented across the business? To measure and visualize it, so to present that information back in a nice coherent way, not massive data sets. To really get to point 6 was providing strategy, insights and recommendations across the entire acquisition lifecycle for what the business might be doing to actually get back the best return on investment through a series and phased approach. So I've put this in here, and it's a pretty generic slide. Almost everyone would have seen this or versions of this as part of the online journey and funnel on a marketing campaign. It's where you use your tools, so your data collection tools like Tag Manager. You flow that into your Google Analytics tool, whether it's free or paid. In this example, we're using GA360, which had some real advantages over the free, to understand the customer's online behavior and store it so we can use it for later actions, outcomes, and linking the data together. So this is pretty generic, but if you go back to the objectives and the problem statements, if you're setting KPIs only across this part of the journey, you're missing some real key ingredients, which is understanding your customers as it relates to sales, not just traffic. Are they going through and hitting my lead generation trigger? Are they hitting the phone number button on my web assets? So it really goes a lot further. So I put this slide in to really call out that there's a big part of this pie that's missing, which is the analytics execution plan and the CRM. That is a term for getting through all the information that they have around their sales and insights. So in this customer use case, we stitched together their online behavioral GA360 data, which we helped to tag up with Tag Manager, and put it into and joined it to the offline sales data. And this is really something we do not only in Datalicious, but across Equifax on a daily basis, which is stitching together disparate data sources and the data collected in, say, your digital channel, and trying to stitch together and join it to the view of the customers that you have, with the ultimate goal really of gaining insights into how those customers are coming in through the channels, how we're attributing and seeing the value from those channels, the content in particular that the business was creating and customers were being attracted to through your search, and getting down to distilling, well, what are those audiences? What are those people coming in order to really optimize the entire process across the business, as well as their own staffing to really increase the customer acquisition and conversion. So this as a data conversation really gets into some really particulars around some difficulties about joining together, say, your online and digital data into your CRM data. And if you're in a business that has multiple product lines, you probably don't have one CRM, or your customer doesn't have one CRM. They've got multiple silos and versions of their customers. So a way I describe that in a traditional e-commerce, someone might have two different web assets, two different silos of customer views. Now merging that together and stitching together the offline data we call a single customer view, where you can take multiple data sets around consumers and join them together to have one view. And I think every company strives for this, various levels of success. It's really important in the data process, because when you have that customer view, you don't only know your footings, you know the cross sales. So this customer has bought product A and product B from me. Who are my repeat customers? Are they being loyal? All these things are really some of the fruits of the labor of being able to join that data together in a consistent method, in digital, in offline, but really the value of this use case was being able to put those two components together. So for the analytics piece here with the customer, the Datalicious team earned a Google Marketing Platform Award for the use of GA360, stitching it together with the offline sales information. Ultimately, what we found at the start was a lot of traffic was coming in on the marketing campaign in through display, but there's quite a large amount of drop off and didn't convert as well. However, what was coming through search was performing quite well. So the first stage of, once we stitched together the digital experience with the sales cycle, looking into that being an average of 12 weeks, we really found that the first place the customer could get probably the highest return on investment immediately was changing the way they produce their content. So what that actually prompted the team to look at when they first saw these results was understanding what customers were searching for when they were looking for particular travel experiences. What information did they really want to find out? And what did they really want from the customer to inform them properly and make them sticky for the travel experiences that they wanted to do? And getting through that prompted further research. And part of the recommendations and outcomes were changing the way the content was produced on their digital assets. And this prompted the business to employ a content and SEO expert to go through and rewrite a lot of the content, change their content strategy, which was not actually the first place where we thought would see the gain when we started out on this process. But what became very clear was there needed to be tweaks to the content, tweaks to the keywords, and really that analysis that was done by joining the online and offline experience let you see what was performing from a sales perspective, not just a traffic perspective on the digital website. So the customer hired in a content and SEO expert who did clearly a fantastic job. And the return on investment just on that alone through organic was really significant. They got that back within 6 months of optimizing that strategy. The second place they went to was paid search. By stitching the information together, they were able to target into their keywords. The content was aligned with that. And it's not just high performing keywords from a volume perspective. It was the ones that were working for the services and products that they offered, which is kind of the next level down of analysis. Really produced a great result for the customer strong return on investment. And the key element here is understanding your customer, what they're looking for, the information they're looking for you to get back was all part of this analytics cycle to the ones that resulted in your actual sales in the offline system. What that enabled the customer to do was to create a strategy around their digital web assets, their content, and really get that piece really seen well, which is what, as you go through it, is kind of the phase one. Phase two, now that I've got the right content, the right profile, I'm understanding what my customers are looking for, I understand what they're looking to get from me as a business in my content, it's the time to turn back up display and other forms of advertising. You've now fundamentally re-baselined how you're talking, how you're marketing about your products and services. And here was really a great return just on the optimizations that were being able to be made to that component. Then when you go back into advertising and using your data, not only for your analytics piece, but for your audiences, and when you advertise them and media plan, you've got them sticky, you know you've got the right content, you've seen the uplift. So that was the really important point around doing the analytics piece and underlying the entire funnel. So some of the key takeaways in using data for your analytics part of a marketing campaign really helps. The data that can be added in, joined and stitched together to understand that online behavior and offline sales. And that's incredibly important. And the results are really clear when you have a business, and I encourage you all to kind of think of a business that you might have in your client base. It might be your business itself, where your sales assets, websites, brochures are quite different to where you actually make the sales and manage your customers. There are lots and lots of business examples of where those two are divorced, especially if you're using optimized sales funnels and things like that. You've got to be able to link the two together, and data plays a huge part in that. The analytics and the data is really understanding how customers were looking, their preferences, what they wanted, how they interact and engage with not only you, but the market and the other places that they can find out information about similar products and services. And that analytics piece really informs the business decisions about, are you using the right channels? In this instance, the outcome was staffing, and find the right audiences through your whole analytics process, and present the information back to them in the way they like. Then moving that over to the very powerful aspect of then when you move back into acquisition mode, it's a very powerful to have that analytics and that complete life cycle understanding in your acquisition funnel around targeting the right customers with the right offers in the right channels. And data provides that level of profiling and audiences, which comes next, to get down to the right offers, the right channels that are working for particular audiences. And that's driven through the data and stitching together the experience across your entire marketing cycle. The next slide is around audience profiling. So as part of the analytics process, you have a profile that you're able to gain through your digital assets. You're able to also profile through your offline and your existing customer set. And so profiling of audiences or customers really provides you insights into who's interested in your particular products and services, what is different between them, and ultimately allows you into actionable audiences. And this is where you're using a consistent data approach across your analytics and your audience profiling and ultimately your audience acquisition strategies really plays a big part. So in Equifax, we really stitch together the online, offline data together. We use our data assets to help customers gain deeper insights, profile their audiences, and then ultimately use that back into multiple channels for acquisition and analytics, again, through a virtuous closed loop cycle. So once you have this information, you have a single customer view of all your customers. You're able to profile them by the products that you have. I know we've got a few financial services providers on the call, so I used a traditional, a simple view of an audience profile for that. But this takes many different dimensions if you're offering a suite of products and services. You really want to know two things in actioning when it comes to audience profiling. You want to know who you want to include, so who might be my target market out of everybody in Australia, and who out of them do I specifically want to not include in my marketing. So some of these examples about an actionable audience, and the thing that makes an audience actionable rather than just an audience or just a profile is using the same data that comes in through your analytics process into your profiling process, and is ultimately the same data that is used when you buy your audiences for the targeting aspect of any acquisition campaign in paid media. So, but your audience profile really lends you to your market sizing, who's available, who's interested in my product, what might they look like. So in including this, I've included generally, the age band 30 to 60, landscape, which is a persona. So for the content creators out there, personas are used quite regularly and everywhere, and it's really helps you define the language of talking to a certain set of consumers and segment in the market, how you might offer to them versus somebody else. And really, in that profiling, helps you decide how you're going to do your creatives, also who's available in market. It's another segment that might index. So the last one is intent. Obviously, you want people that are interested in your products, and data can help provide that intent level for, in this case, a mortgage from a credit provider, that the customers might be in market for that. Lastly, and it's probably a part that often gets overlooked, but is incredibly important, which is, who do I really not want to market to? Who do I not want to pay advertising to? Obviously, if you're advertising to the wrong people, then that's going to ultimately decay your return on investment. Commonly, we see customers wanting to remove their existing customers, and this actually proposes a bit of a data challenge for removing them from an audience, especially when you have digital acquisition and your data of your existing customers is stored in offline, which follows this model as well. We, and quite regularly they use the data onboarding services. We have one as well, which converts your offline customers into a digital identifiers, which you can then exclude from your campaigns. The other thing that's kind of unique to Equifax and really is in the financial services industry, but it's across other industries as well. You really want to remove unsuitable applicants or unsuitable people for your product. As Equifax has, there's various legislations that let us help financial service industries. We have other data sources that help remove people that might not be suitable for the product or service that you're offering. And the last step in it is really, once you get past the profiling and is getting down into the nitty gritty of understanding your customers, coming to your products, coupled together with what they're looking for in market, you get down into audience actioning. There's really two actions that you take. You're either running some type of acquisition campaign, which is the slide after this, which gets into the channels that you go into to acquire the audience that you're looking for your products. But as we've seen in the use case above from the analytics, the profiling along with understanding the user journey through digital to your offline systems really helps action the content that you want to create. Myself as a product manager, I use it quite regularly to work out actually the features that I want to go into a product. What do I really want to include in a product I might be creating? In this cycle, the audience profiling is really critical to understanding those components, to the information I put out into market, and then ultimately how I come back and acquire those right customers for me in my marketing and advertising channels. So audience actioning and is really based around data consistency. So using the same audience profile delivered across multiple channels to find the prospects that really match the acquisition profile and the product profile that you're looking for. So you use that same profiling that you've created through the analytics phase and the audience phase, being able to be consistent about that and the way you purchase your data in market and media planning is really important. So I've brought through you have this audience profile, you're pretty sure about who's buying with you, who's your available market that's left that you want to really advertise to. And then you've got a decision, and this is where it comes back into closed loop from your analytics phase about the channels in which you're receiving your information from. So those channels in the online sense, your DSPs, DMPs, digital display, general display being video, broadcast video, mobile, search. I've left off classifieds here, but essentially you go back into going, well, I have this audience profile and it's consistent. It doesn't change. Then I have the option of going, well, which channels do I use this data in to bring them back to my products and services through acquisition? In Equifax, we have both online and offline campaign data available. But what's really important here around profiling and getting into the headspace of your customers and the products and services that you offer or creating content for is the channels in which you then execute. So if you're running an analytics up the top, you'll then start buying particular audiences in particular channels, and that audience is consistent. You're able to gain even deeper insights beyond just which channel is performing, but which audience in which channel is performing. And this really informs a lot of decision making as you go through this process to optimize out your channel acquisition strategies, which audience performs in which area. Also, if you're running like a drip campaign or a campaign over a period, really helps inform the timing of when you might put content into the market or advertising into the market over a time series to one consistent audience, making sure that you get those eyeballs just not once, but twice, and maybe in different channels. And this really comes into, so I'll put in that last part, as you action this information and it goes into your media planning around your profile and your channels, again, you're actioning it through acquisition, buying the data or buying the audiences in the right channels and doing that in a consistent fashion. The important part with this is consistency and data. So one of the parts in Equifax, which I touched on above, which was removing unsuitable applicants from products and services, comes with a high degree of regulation and responsibility from Equifax part and compliance around making sure that we use the data that we have responsibly in all these channels. So as we collate the data and intent in our own data assets, a huge amount of data transparency is required, not only from our partners, but also how we engage with that data, how we use it in a responsible fashion. And that's why it's really great to be part of the IAB series on all of this, because there's lots of data out there. The data is very different. So your data in your online world and regulation to your own customers, and then to us providing reference data sets into that. But ultimately it really gets down into when you're using that data to create your analytics, your audiences, being consistent and transparent around that data, how it's getting used in each one of those channels is incredibly important to really drive the results. And this is where it becomes closed loop. So as you move through this acquisition cycle, these people are landing back onto your web assets and you're back into the top. You're running your analytics again and working out the audiences that are working for each channel, and then being able to have very distinct KPIs that really help you inform the decisioning as you move through buying your media, planning your media, but also the analytics that support your business decision based on data. Yeah. So that's the conclusion of my slides. There's a Q&A section. And Jonas, I know we had some data questions on this slide.
We do.
Yeah.
We have a few questions coming through, but and look, thank you so much. It's fantastic. But I wouldn't mind just understanding a little bit more around the persistent nature of the profiles that you have, the privileged access to the data, and how also linking it in with any offline acquisitions as well as the online.
Yeah, so the use case here, online data versus offline data, there's many different data forms. I kind of classify them into, my easiest way of classifying data is I think about it like a supermarket shelf life. How persistent is my insight going to be? Is it going to last me a week? Is it going to last me 2 weeks, a month? How long is the data good for? Which is really a topic that's acute in everyone's mind around cookies, third-party cookies. That data lifecycle is becoming shorter and shorter. And for me, that's a bit of like the ice cream or the fresh produce in your supermarket. All right, you've got to get it, you've got to use it. Otherwise, it's going to go off or not be available to you in a relatively short amount of time. As you move through kind of different data assets that might be persistent for longer, you get into mobile advertising IDs, which they also have a varying shelf life of months to years. And then in the Equifax suite, we're really lucky that we have a person's identity record that is persistent for a lifetime. But then using all that data responsibly is really incredibly important. But those data life cycles play a huge part in understanding your conversion life cycles when you're in products that have quite a long conversion cycle or a long consideration cycle for customers, where you're outside not only the capture of the sale inside your digital funnel, but the persistency and regulatory persistency of the data and available to measure that customer's journey when you're going through disparate systems. We're quite fortunate in that we have such a large life cycle view of the data, but that really gets down into the nitty gritty about your first party cookies, second party cookies, third party cookies, time life cycles, where this use case and a lot of what we do at Equifax varies is there's the digital part of that, which is quite commonly well known and used, but how you connect that to the offline does become really quite difficult if the data doesn't persist over the time period that you need to measure it for.
Yeah, it's often talked about, but misunderstood, just the level of effort and capabilities required to actually close that loop. So I think what you run us through here has been fantastic to set us up for success on the topics we're going to come to, particularly in terms of governance and privacy next week, and then the capabilities aspects of identity the week after. Now, in terms of the Q&A, there are a few questions here, even one from me, which is very exciting. Chris, you're right to take that first one on device IDs. I can read it out. When you are stitching,
you can read it out, please. Yeah.
When you're stitching together disparate data sources, is this based on a cookie device ID? How Equifax is looking at using cookieless IDs and applying this to supply outside the Google ecosystem? This is from Dan Richardson of Verizon.
Yeah, so I'm going to break that down a little bit because you can fork off onto many roads on this. So when you're stitching any data together, the first place you look to is really what have you got. in the top use case, it was cookie based and user behavior based, joining back into the CRM. The hard part around obviously connecting disparate data sources is you don't have a primary key that you can just do a straight lookup on, which requires various levels depending on the data that you have to how you make that join. And the use cases that you have with it. It's really about how the client is collecting the information and how it can then connect into the Equifax data assets and then back out again. To answer the second part of the question, or device IDs, we're using device IDs at Equifax along with various other data sources to create the profiling over mobile advertising IDs. How is Equifax and Datalicious looking at cookieless ID and applying this outside the Google ecosystem? That's a really good question, Dan. I actually will have to come back to you on that precisely. So I can't answer it right now. I don't actually have an answer off the top of my mind about how I'd respond to that. So if you don't mind, I'll put that in the Q&A.
Yeah, that's fine. We'll answer that on the page. We will be sending out the decks and some links to all the attendees. Worry not, and any of the questions we don't get to, and including that one, we'll answer then. I think that's absolutely fair enough. I have one here from a certain Gayla Roy from Ivy Australia. What role does industry have in verifying data quality? How do I know my profile data that I'm buying is accurate? So from an industry perspective, there's a number of outputs that we have locally in terms of education and best practices and recommendations, but probably one of the most interesting global projects that Tech Lab have been running recently, which we've really got into here in Australia, is something called Data Label. So think of it as a nutritional or ingredients label for audience segments, but there's a minimum statutory requirement in terms of some of the declarations that you have to stipulate and also keep updated. There are in fact 11, but there are a lot more fields that can be filled out and maintained. And this brings consistency to audience data in terms of what the makeup is, how often is it refreshed, how recent is it, and what's actually in there within a consistent taxonomy of labels. We've been running a bit of awareness locally, producing some Australian labels, and there's been a bit of push on that recently. From a global level, there is actually a full certification compliance program running, and there's a few companies on this call that I know are going through that process, but locally we'll also be on the pilot for a database and an automated upload process, an API, marketplace API it would be called, which will be hosted on datalabel.org. So you can automatically keep the segments updated within the database and make it searchable. Not addressable by AdTech, but searchable. So that's a project that we're really excited about in the space around quality assurance for. And we'll actually touch upon that a little bit next week also.
Yeah, I'd also happily just touch on the last part of it.
Yes.
Is what I'm buying accurate? So part of my job in this presentation here was about how we use and purpose the data in a compliant fashion in Equifax. When it comes to data buying, I face the same issue. I sit on the other side of the fence in how we interact with our data, how we ingest it, what are the compliance rules about how the data comes in across the marketing services business. And it's quite a difficult question to answer around how do I know the data that I'm buying is accurate. There's a few different dimensions, and this is why I really like the transparency label of IAB. To be honest, as a data supplier, it asks some awkward questions, but they're good questions. So when you're sitting on the other side of the fence and you're looking to purchase data, the reliability and the sourcing and the due diligence of the company that you're working with to acquire that data, for me, is actually a key ingredient into whether I pursue buying data from that person, how they process it, construct it, and manage it is all really a huge part of how that data is collated. And that ultimately gives me confidence of whether data is correct. Whether there's a portion of it I think might be incorrect, but it's still okay for my general purpose, or what I'm using, or distinctly what I'm planning to use it for. So certainly the data transparency label is a really key ingredient, I think, for the marketplace, to have that common understanding about how things are produced, how accurate it is, where did this come from, to overall give anyone in this market confidence to what they're actually doing. So
yep, you sit on the data council for us here, so you know all about it, and there'll be a bit more information coming out in June, July as we get ourselves involved in this global pilot. And I know Tech Lab have been really impressed by the interest here in Australia, as well as elsewhere. So we have one more question, which we'll end with. It's for you, Chris. What is your advice to brands who work on a franchisee model where data can be siloed? How do you approach unifying these types of data sets?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question. So the franchise model has two distinct different models, if you like, between a franchisor who is franchisee owned, I think I've got that the right way, or have been independently owned by another company, and there's a franchise in between. That question comes down to ultimately who owns the silos of data, and adds a little bit of complexity around the capture and compliance of it. But I'm just going to run on the assumption that the franchise owns all the data assets. Normally in that franchise model, you're going to have a regional or an area capturement to that. To silo it together, there's a few different approaches to it, but ultimately you're going to end up with a series of silos, particularly if each franchisee or each store is collecting its information in disparate systems. It gets a little easier if they're all in a similar system. But really unifying that data across all of those silos is stitching it together. So using, at Equifax, we have a reference data set that can help you stitch that together, where you can't necessarily do it inside your own silo. It sounds really easy when you think about it. You go, oh yeah, I can just stitch together this data, a name's a name. But that's not quite true. People enter their names differently, addresses are different, unless you have really robust validation on your capture methods, how that information is input. Even simple things that you don't really think about when you first start it, but a mobile number, a 04 space versus a 04 hyphen versus a +6. When you get down into syntax validation, data validation across all these disparate systems, it becomes a really large job not only to clean the data, but then also to join it back together to create a single customer view and interaction points across your multiple businesses. So that's where that probably more answers the how Equifax can really help you unifying these types of data assets. But in that franchise model, the first question comes down to compliance, data ownership, and consenting into it. If it's your own business's data, then really it's validating those fields, finding the common ways to stitch it together to work out that journey flow, or I visited franchise 1 to franchise 2 way of doing it.